Good morning, good evening, good day, greetings and salutations. Might I add a preemptive welcome to the Safe Room featuring Security Side Quests. I am one of your hosts, Tristan Watty, and I am joined by the marvelous, the mysterious, the multilingual Russ. How's it going?
Hey, how you doing today?
Doing all right.
Monday, so
Yeah, it's Monday, right? It's Peachy Keen Day. That's what we'll rename it and add taglines every day of the week. But for you first-time joiners, let me reintroduce myself. Tristan Watty. I come to you from the professional services team of AWS, where we help to accelerate customers' journey to the cloud in a secure manner, fashion, and form. And joined by Russ. And Russ, where are you coming from?
I'm coming from the customer incident response team. So usually I don't talk to you unless bad things are happening and you're having a bad day. But we help customers remediate and contain security incidents and get them back to baseline. So
yeah, and you can also talk to us about various food types. Right? We always like to have conversations with that when it's not an emergency or incident response, right? Something along those lines. But
I mean, you could during an incident. I'll still have a conversation.
It's like, let's talk about food while we're doing parallel actions, right? We can multi-process, right? Exactly. The same way we say, hey, where are you from? Feel free to put it in the chat, as well as having a secondary question. And I have to take the long pause for the secondary question to give some epic aura building to this, because we want to say a very long sentence, a question. Would you rather be stuck in your favorite game world or have your favorite game character join your world or our world, depending on how you look at it? I heard it both ways. So, Russ, where do you go with this?
I would have my favorite character join our world. I think, as rough as our world can be sometimes, I mean, there's a reason why those games are created. So I'm gonna have to pick our world, and I would pick Crash Bandicoot and bring him into our world, because that would be hilarious. So
yes, and I have so many questions on that. Do boxes come with him, or is it just a character, right? Does he bring all those items over?
I mean, you got to figure he's got pockets. So, he's got 99 of those fruit things.
Yeah, that's a good one. And it's funny because this feels like one of those genie type of questions where if you say, oh, I'll go to a game world, then you start thinking about, okay, what game world? And you've realized you wouldn't be the main character. You wouldn't be the side character. You'd be the NPC just trying to make bread. And you need
my cabbages.
Yeah. You need something, right? And then you can't do anything until the hero walks by and says, oh, I'll take your quest for you. And yeah. So I don't know. I think I would have my favorite game character join our world. And the game character would be Mega Man. That would be interesting. I think we're getting there. We're getting close. Hi, folks. Right? So to go along with that same train of thought, manner, fashion, and form, let us dig into today's topic. Right? And you may say, hey, what is today's topic? Well, in order to understand how we got here today, Russ is going to say where we were yesterday.
Yes. So last week, our topic was level 99 encryption enabled, AWS secure messaging solutions. You don't have to have watched any of our previous episodes to be able to follow along with what we're going to discuss today, which is AWS WAF fundamentals. Our episode is a new challenger approaches, request denied. And so we'll be going over some of the WAF fundamentals, including what is WAF and why it's important.
Yeah, and I think this is an important topic because a lot of people don't realize when it comes to just web application firewall, we say it once the full time and then we'll abbreviate it. So when you think of WAF and just what it does, you really have to dig into why you would need this, right? And you also have to dig into go into a cozy game, right? Yeah, we'll dig into that at one point, right? I'm looking at Animal Crossing, but I digress. So today, I would say welcome to AWS WAF, right? So what we're trying to do is explain the purpose of WAF and how likely you are to use it when it comes to forming that protective layer that sits in front of your web applications and helps you to filter out some malicious traffic, you may say. Then, what are the building blocks that you would need when leveraging WAF? I think that's a very important part because you often think of like, oh, it's just a service, but you want to look at the entire WAF architecture just to see all the different components that come with it, right? You think of rule groups, you think of conditions, you think of rules themselves, right? All these different items. And then how do you build up those rules? What are the actions inside those rules? Are you allowing, denying, right? Are you doing it based on location? And the last piece is tying it all together and kind of figuring out what your landscape is. So how do you start to build a comprehensive security solution and drive towards your target state security strategy without understanding some of the ways they combined? Right? It's almost like, 5 mini lines coming together to form one big line? Something along those lines. When you have WAF, you think of CloudFront, you think of ALBs, you think of API gateway, you think of apps. There's a couple of different things, right? But where we want to start off today is normally where we like to, and that is with a poll, just to get the feelers out. And what is today's poll? Well, what is your fighting style? Because if you look at the title of today's episode, a new challenge your approaches. So there's a lot of different fighting games, we would say, and that we correlate to. And this poll helps to kind of bring that alignment with WAF. So feel free to put 1, 2, 3, or 4 in the chat as you start to think about, okay, fighting style. Are you a counter striker, zone controller, aggressive guard, strategic fighter? And all these correlate to something. Russ, where do you lean?
Well, I'm going to answer this question from a purely AWS perspective because this is not how I play games at all. But aggressive guard, I'm definitely not a defensive type of player. But in this case, I would go with custom rules. Definitely depends on kind of your environment and what your target state strategy looks like. But to be able to get that that level of customization to your organization and your environment is going to be huge. Just being able to be like, this threat is relevant to us, so we will use this rule, or this is not relevant to us, so we will, adjust this to make it more, in line with what you're trying to do. So, yeah.
Aggressive guard, and that is interesting because you can tell kind of your thinking process is like the maturity level, and you kind of seeing how to implement some customized features to help yourself from speaking to yourself as an IR person. Right? I think I got that logic, right? It's like the
Exactly.
had conversation, right? When you're talking about the past. But
yep.
I think I lean towards the counter striker. Just block everything, right? Just block, and then we will adjust accordingly based on a ticket or, organizational direction, things of that nature. That's kind of where I go. But the reason why kind of go to that as one of my go-tos is I like to think about what are we trying to do with the service as a whole. And that's kind of where the WAF fundamentals come into play. Because when you think of, all right, I want to protect my web applications from common web exploits and attacks. Simple. It's a one-liner. You can put it on a mug. And where you go with it is, hey, right?
Not spending money on that mug.
It's just going to go around the mug in the circle. You want to think about your web applications as a holistic, okay, you have HTTP requests. You always have to add that slash in there, even though we prefer the secure methods of translation. But as web attacks start to evolve and become more sophisticated, you want something that's in place that can grow with your modern applications. And that's kind of where WAF comes into play, because it helps you to protect sensitive data and integrates with a bunch of different AWS services as we went through the list, like CloudFront and things of that nature. But one of the key components, I would say, is the flexibility that you have to adjust to what your environment needs. And that's kind of where Russ was going with the custom rules. There's a lot that you can do with WAF, especially when you put it in front of your applications. But I think the key component that we've seen customers have a trouble kind of implementing and understanding is just the basic rule, I would say rule terminology, let's say, when it comes to what are the building blocks of something like a WAF architecture, right? What's the web ACL? Well, it's the primary container for the rules and the rule groups. Okay, check. Okay, what are rule actions? What are rule statements? What are rule groups? What are IP sets? And it starts to go down this list. So one of the things that we like to start off with is just the definitions of these, right? Simple one-liners of, okay, rule actions, you can either block, allow, count, or capture responses, right? Something along those lines. So by understanding that, now you can start to say, all right, how do I shape my rules? I come from that, we said that counter type block everything, right? So now we want to block everything. All right, how do I get stuff to work then? Well, that starts to get into, okay, what IP addresses are you trying to reach? Is it a global application? Is it an internal application? Is it something that only a specific set of stakeholders are going to access, or somebody with some type of token, or so on and so forth? These are the things that you want to consider when you're building out your WAF architecture, because there's a lot of components, and some of the I would say migrations to the cloud involves evolving your logic of how you understand how web applications and how traffic is handled within your organization. And what we've seen is organizations try to apply, let's say, physical firewalls to web application firewall knowledge. And some things translate one-to-one, but a lot doesn't when you really think about it. So you want to understand the definitions and how to leverage that. And the best way to do that, I think, is just understanding those fundamentals, right? I don't know, Russ, have you seen this from your side of just, okay, we're going to do a one-to-one. I have this on-premises firewall, and I'm going to apply the same logic to WAF.
I have not actually run into that. I think that that's a common thing, but I'm usually I'm more getting the what is a WAF and why do I need it?
Yeah,
I'm asking about WAF logs, and they're like, what is that? So firewall. So just knowing even the basics and being able to implement even a baseline default WAF is still going to be miles ahead of nothing.
Yeah, and that's interesting because sometimes applications may route out or go back to their on-premises environment if you're looking at the hybrid type of setup where everything is mainly based out of on-prem, and then it kind of wraps back around to do some type of posture checking or just egress, ingress traffic. Yep. So it interesting because you get those same, what is WAF? Why do we need to use this? We just go through, and then there's cost optimization and all those kind of things that kind of get put to the side just for the fact of this is what we've been doing and we're just adding another layer. And as your organization tries to mature, some of the conversations you need to have is, okay, what is the most optimal approach to this? But ahead of that is, what is the most secure approach to this? And that's kind of where you start to have the conversations, especially if you look at the web access control list. Because when you get to that, you start to think of, okay, what is the overall hierarchy that we're trying to form within our organization? Do you consider, let's say, regional or global web ACLs? What are the best practices that we should? How do we associate with other services? How do we test? And that's usually some of the key components. And I think when you start to think of it that way, you start to say, how does this service really work? And part of understanding your architecture when it comes to WAF is understanding kind of the evaluation logic, right? It's similar to identity. When you think of IAM, you think of the chart that you can go to and say, okay, you start here, and this is a deny unless you go here, and then so on and so forth. You have to start thinking of it how the web requests are being processed, especially from a rule ordering standpoint, right? Because within WAF, you can have the rule priorities and orders and things of that nature. And if you pick a certain order and you're like, hey, it's not working, or hey, I can't get traffic through, that can make your day not go as planned, right? i.e., it's why didn't I take lunch today? Oh, because I had to try and figure this out, right? So part of that is understanding just the basics to start off with, then going from there. So building blocks is a key component of that. So if we think of the building blocks, I know where my mind goes. Where does your mind go, Russ?
So when I think of building blocks, that's when I think of WAF rules. Those are going to be your building blocks of, your entire web application defense. So yeah, it is important to know WAF rules as well as, how they're structured. You can't be making a WAF rule if you don't know what to put into it. So yeah, let's just jump right into that. So first of all, you're going to have a rule name and a description, which is important to be fairly descriptive. Something like, block SQL injection, or, rate limiting this API or something like that. Definitely want it to be descriptive in nature, so that way when someone's going back and being like, okay, what happened here, they can actually see the rule and what it is supposed to do. So that's really important for, especially when you're prioritizing and getting into the actual content. You want to know which rule you're actually looking at and discussing. And then you're going to have your rule priority. So you're going to have your order based on your priority, depending on what your your entire threat model looks like. In your organization, that's going to be very contextual. But your lower numbers are going to be your higher priority rules. So that'll be the next one. Then there'll be a rule statement, and then this is the actual core of the rule, and it's actually defining what the rule will be looking for. So there's simple ones like looking for this, maybe blocked IP range, and then there's more complex ones with nested conditions sort of thing. So you can do a lot with that. Those are very customizable. And then you'll have after the statement is the action, and then that's going to determine when the rule, when those conditions that you put in the rule statement are met, what happens. So are you going to allow the traffic, block the traffic, count the traffic, whatever you're looking to do, you just put that in as the action. And so once you have the actual rules set, you can determine the criteria. So you can do different types of criteria. So like I was saying before, IP addresses, you can do geographic locations, string matches, regex, there's a ton of different criteria that you can use for this. So it really can be as simple or as complex as you need it to be. And then it'll look through the actual headers or the URI path or the body or even cookies to apply that criteria of the incoming network requests. So in order to build these rules, you also have to get into understanding the logical operators. It feels basic, but understanding an and or an or a not makes a significant difference. So when you're going to block, say, IP ranges, you're saying block all of these in this IP range and in this range. And if you do it as or not, you completely change it. So an and is all conditions must be true. So if it's coming from either of these IP ranges, that would be an or, because it's any of the conditions are true. And then a not would just be a negating condition. So, as as easy and basic as that sounds, just creating those rules and understanding, how exactly those are going to be applied is important, especially with the and or. Having all the conditions be met is something that I've seen be misconfigured. So that can cause.
Well, I was just going to jump in and say visual diagrams. And make sure that you have some type of diagram. And this is where I often see a lot of customers have a little bit of issue just because it's, hey, we're accelerating, so we can't write documentation. Well, for these kind of things, this is how you point out your gaps. And the other reason I just wanted to pop in with a question from Schizophrenic Web Developer. Is AWS using mod security for its WAF service? So the secret sauce behind AWS WAF is within the AWS WAF service team. But what I would suggest, if you have specific questions, always look through the documentation and kind of the WAF service page itself, and it may be able to answer some of the questions that you're looking for. But I wouldn't be able to comment on the specific engine behind WAF. But thank you for that question. And the other thing, Zor will be. So I know what you're talking about in terms of the logic itself. So WAF usually goes by and or. I was going to say and not. But so and or not. So thank you again for that. But sorry, back to you, Russ.
Yeah, no, those are good questions. And it's those types of things that you do need to know to be able to actually implement these WAF rules without running into issues or having to see me. So yeah, you definitely can make it as complex or as simple as needed. Just going back to how these these building blocks, the rules are I guess the actual rule actions, what they do. So allow, when you would use an allow versus a block. So for Tristan's example, when you are blocking everything as a rule, you have to know what to allow, especially if you are using some sort of on-prem and cloud hybrid architecture, then you will want to know what you want your admins to be able to access your application. So if you block all, you'll have to allow those specific IP addresses or specific keys or whatever you want to use and whatever your security infrastructure already looks like. And so that would be an example of when you'd want to allow on a block like default. And then it would be the same situation for the reverse for a block. So say you have something that, your website that you want to allow to the public, the open public internet. So you would want to allow incoming traffic as a default. And so if you'd want to block specific, maybe people or IP addresses that you had seen previously in like DDoS attacks or previously blocked activities and using those to update, your IP ranges, you'd want to use a specific block rule action to be able to prevent them from having their traffic go through. And then we also have count, which is really useful for testing and monitoring cases. So yeah, those are kind of your rule actions. And then, going into your request components for the actual web request, you do have your headers. So the WAF will look through, examine those headers. So looking for common headers to monitor, any X forwarded for handling type of headers. And then it will look through the string inspection. So whatever type of string match that you would use for, say, SQL injection patterns, we know the common ones, or cross-site scripting patterns as well, using those to be able to determine, hey, this string matches a common SQL injection, so it's blocked from being able to reach our application or our server, whatever. And then you also have your URI path components. So that's going to be protection against like directory traversal or controlling the resources themselves, and like resource access controlling. And so those are going to be your main web request components that you can use to build those rules. And then there's also AWS managed rules. Those are going to be the ones that AWS provides. There's a like a core rule set that you can use, and then you can also, in addition, add your own custom rules. So it's kind of like the best of both worlds, having AWS do your core basic rules, and then using the custom rules to be able to, really fit your environment and your architecture and what you're trying to do. But there's also some cost considerations with that because of having a managed service. So lots of things that kind of you have to think about when you're either signing up for WAF or building your WAF service. And so those are kind of our building blocks and our little basics that we have to all agree on what they mean before we're able to discuss and kind of like you were saying, be able to translate that from your regular firewall on premises versus this on the cloud.
And I just put this on the screen from Schizo in terms of, can we limit traffic by IP? For example, 10 requests per minute per IP using AWS WAF. I think there's a couple of specific numbers that I can't remember off the top of my head, but I know there is rate-based limiting that you can put into place, but there's some specific numbers. I don't know if they get strictly down to what you were saying, but there are some minimum configuration rates and things of that nature. So thank you for that question. Right. And one piece I would add in is when you are going through all these different items, I think it's important when you're understanding the building blocks of what goes into like a web request itself. And you mentioned the headers and the query strings, URIs and things of that nature. But when you are trying to monitor and block and allow all these different traffic components, I think it's important to understand what goes into these requests, right? Even going down to, okay, HTTP methods, you get, your post, put and stuff like that, right? When you're trying to filter out different items, you want to get into, I say, break things down to ones and zeros, something along those lines, but you want to understand what is coming in and being transmitted, because if you look at the body content, right, of something, right, do you have like size limitations for inspection? Do you have cookies in place? There's a whole variety of different things that come into HTTP and HTTPS that when you're going through understanding your WAF architecture, you have to have some considerations from. So what I suggest is not to get scared off of using some of the components of like WAF or things of that nature because of the unknown, what I would say is start out with the prescriptive guidance and tuning it to your organizational preferences, right? Because you're trying to move towards a North Star of your security. And some of it starts with, hey, just a baseline. This is the best practices seen from multiple customers on how they implemented it. And then you could start to tune it of, hey, I have this one particular website that's having, some type of issue. Now you can drill down and start to understand, because I think when you come into the different learning types and things of that nature, sometimes, and Russ, I don't know about you, is like sometimes you have to do it, right? Or sometimes you read it, or sometimes you have to walk around the room in a circle, and then it's like, oh, I get it now.
Yeah.
So, I think that's a big component, right? So I think part of this is manage rule groups, right? It's AWS managed rules, right? There's often some type of structure and reason why there's these pre-configured protections against common threats that you listed. So you think of the AWS core rule set, you think of OWASP top 10, right? It's like, all right, are we trying to protect, like you were saying, like cross-site scripting? Can we protect against that, right? So understanding can come over time.
Let me answer that. Yes, you can. Please do.
Russ is like, please. But I think part of that is understanding over time, hey, the managed rule group helps you with immediate protections without the security expertise that you might have in an advanced maturity level within your organization. So you're trying to balance, security with the application functionality. And if you don't know the security side inside and out, then having something like the managed rule groups would be good. And then you kind of go from there. Because some of the managed rule groups, or majority of them, come from, hey, people who understand the ins and outs, as well as people who have been through a couple of, let's say, side quests in their time, right? Or, they're legends in themselves. So that brings us to, as side quest legend has it, this section of the show, which we always like to transition to in a fun, interesting way. So easy way to start this off is with an applause, because we're starting with side quest.
Wonderful.
Also, our good old we have a side quest is to understand a specific customer story, a customer initiative, something that we can kind of put a visual to. So in this side quest today, think about, let's say, an organization that maybe is experiencing multiple web attacks, multiple web application attacks, if we want to get specific. And this organization name today, we will say it's the Cloud Warriors Gaming, organization. Cloud Warriors Gaming organization. We'll go with that, because they need to level up their defense strategy. If you see what we did there. So while we're trying to protect against these web application attacks, we are looking at it and it's like, hey, we have the basic security groups in place. We discovered kind of some of the challenges that we have. And where do they come from? Well, let's say request filtering, bot management, and performance impacts. Because if they are a Cloud Warrior Gaming organization, chances are they deal with a lot of cloud gaming. And what they need is performance. But they also need protection, because does anybody want to play a game where there are a lot of bots that are cheating? Maybe, if that was the title of the game. But in this particular use case, say the security team identified that maybe there's certain game servers that have inconsistent protection patterns. Some use IP blocking, some maybe have rate limiting, something along those lines. So with that thought, now you start to say, well, the security kind of depended on who was there implementing items, right? Because different levels of maturity, different approaches, different run books. So they have inconsistent protection methods. They have maybe, let's say, rule performance implications. Because if they implement rules, will that implement some downtime in their game servers because people left it? So as you start to go through and understand this side quest, I think the place to start is with a signature move. So, Russ, you see where this is going. Because if your needs a signature move, what would it be called and what would you choose? Remember, the theme of today is a new challenger approaches. So where would you go with that?
Okay, so immediately, especially because you did reference inconsistent protection patterns. For this reason, I would go with AWS managed rules as my signature move. And if I look it up in my handy dandy Dr. Watty, what is your signature move manual? It says that AWS managed rules is the 100-hand slap. And so that is my signature WAF move.
And I think that is an appropriate title, right? Because you just think of this. If you don't get the reference, 10 points to the other person who does, because it comes from Street Fighter. And essentially, when you start to think of how you can leverage this, you start to get to a point where we bring on the side quest board. And for you, who
the beloved side quest board.
Yes. Okay. The loving. I would add the marvelous in there, the marvelous side quest board, where we have a physical demonstration of the customer example that we're getting to, and that we're trying to understand how to solve for X, and where X is the security in this manner. We have this side quest. So we have our authenticated user, and we have our AWS environment. But you might see somewhere along the path, there's a group of individuals who shouldn't be there because they're not authenticated. They're not part of my network, but they're sitting in between my authenticated user and the AWS environment. My mind goes to when you're at the buffet and you're trying to get to the good stuff, there's always somebody in between. So how do you how do you figure out this, right?
Elbows,
right? You figure out the challenges with the elbows. But if we go back to our use case in our cloud gaming environment, they had the inconsistent protection patterns. They have mixed security standards. So something like this can be completely feasible because maybe you go to one server and it doesn't have maybe geo IP blocking. It just has a regular, let's say, IP address. Oh, these ones were bad, so we just banned. But what they need to understand is, what is the next step? And I think one of the next steps is, how do we do something like add security? So we kind of bump that out of the path and make them a bystander. And that's where we start to get towards leveraging something like AWS, where we can start to implement some of these standards across our environment. And I pose this question to the chat and Russ. But Russ, since you can answer verbally, if you were thinking of, okay, we have WAF, what other two services can we put together to make it a combo attack?
Okay, so a combo attack, I would probably say WAF. I'd say guard duty and shields. WAF, guard duty, and shield.
That is a good combination. So if you do WAF, guard duty, shield, that's kind of like the ultimate defense combo, right?
I saw it in my my Dr. Watty's "What's Your Defense" combo. I forgot to look it up in the manual.
Yeah, you see, you recalled it. Right? Documentation, folks. So as we start to go through and understand how we build out this combination, well, we have guard duty here. So when you think of guard duty, does it just sit out here? No. Where we have to think of guard duty is something parallel to our environment that's embedded in our environment. If I could put it on top, I would, but you would block the image. What it's doing is actively looking through and understanding, hey, all these API calls that are being made in my environment, which one of these are malicious? What is happening? Right? So if you have something like CloudTrail, if you have something like, I would say, maybe CloudWatch inside your environment, you start to build up these combos of different varieties where you can have a perfect counter, or you can have the ultimate defense. You can have maybe something that works for your specific organizational type. And that's where we're trying to get to, because having WAF is just one part of the puzzle. You want to have something in place that you can have the standardized rule sets. You can have maybe automatic rule updates, and something that you can establish custom rule groups. Because I can imagine a financial organization might not have the same direction as our cloud gaming organization, right? And so it's a little bit of a dichotomy you have to go through. But some of the fundamentals don't change. It's the services themselves that you're leveraging together. It's just how you're piecing them together a little bit depends on your organization, because you might have the custom rule groups. And they might look different because of what direction you're coming from. And the other component that Russ brought up earlier is the logging area, right? If you were to have an incident within your environment, do you have the enhanced WAF logging enabled? Do you have the performance monitoring enabled? Because game servers, you have to understand the loads, because at any given time you can have thousands and thousands of people on one server. And if something happens, even a little blip, it can cause all of those users to either help, let's say, scale out your organization unwillingly. And what I mean by that is, hey, if you have auto scaling on, then you're using more instances, right? And did you need to? Because what can happen is that exponential sprawl, if you don't have, the correct setups and things of that nature to stop and limit and rate, all those good things. But the underlying point is, do you have the mechanisms to protect against that? And WAF is one of those components. So if you were to think of your WAF, let's say dojo, right? Your training stage, right? So when you think of how do you train those building blocks, those muscle reflexes, things of that nature, you start to go towards, hey, what do I have to think of? Well, I think part of it is understanding, do I have a certain type of rule within my environment that I'm trying to perfect? And that's usually how the training stages goes. It's like, okay, we're going to do each combo one at a time until you perfect it. In this case is, can I complete these different areas to help better understand how to level up my WAF architecture and design? And the main piece of this is taking that step back to understand, hey, how can I get the most from my training area? Well, we hit the good old pause game, or Zach Moore's timeout, as we call it, and kind of think about that for a bit.
Do we call it that?
Yeah. So one of the pieces of that is the great voice of Russ. But the second piece is understanding in that training area for you to understand. Well, first part of it is understanding your rules in action. And what we have to do is kind of take that brief pause, that silence. And I have to do it. I have to play the fairy, right? Because it's that dramatic moment of trying to understand. If I don't understand how my rules handle suspicious requests, then I won't be able to understand how to protect against them. So you're in a conundrum. But luckily, you have the Safe Room Feature and Security side quest, so we can bring a little bit of clarity to you. Because how do you identify suspicious requests? Well, understand those key definitions, those building blocks that we spoke about for the last 30 minutes. And start to think, okay, if I go to WAF, I understand pattern analysis. Do I understand how it detects a common attack signature like SQL injection? Well, you can. But the key part of that is understanding that there's a baseline of normal traffic patterns that if you have the managed roles to start off with, because you're trying to build up and level up your security knowledge, you can start to see how these logs are coming into your environment. there's different pieces of the puzzle you can start to implement to say, count this, right? To understand, like, okay, why is this count all the way up here? Why is it over 9,000? Well, it's how you're leveraging it, or how somebody's trying to leverage your environment against you. So one of these pieces is understanding your current security posture, understanding your security maturity, so that you can overall level up. So I think going down that, it can get technical, right? There's no way about it, because you can go into string matching conditions, right? Saying, okay, I have a regular expression, and then this is how I'm going to do this. Well, that is all well and good, but we don't have enough time to go down that route for today. What we're trying to get across is the certain factors, like what our members of the chat said, of like, okay, is there any rate-based rules that I can implement? Some fundamentals I should know. Well, yeah, you can count requests, you can have threshold configurations, you can have rule chaining, where you may not have XOR out of the box, but you can have combinations that eventually get to that point, right? Where you have, yes, it starts to get into and/or logic, but you can essentially create something similar. So that's part of understanding those key principles. I don't know. What are your thoughts on it, Russ?
Yeah, definitely agree. I think that, it is as complicated as you want to make it, especially when we're discussing, not just, our rules and our rule groups, but like, what basic rule configurations are we going to use? Like, are we going to use geo-blocking? Are we going to use rate limiting? Common attack protections. I mean, just even figuring out where your rule is going to go to protect your application. Considerations for your deployment. And how you're deploying your app is also something that you will have to how that is will affect how you implement your WAF and how your WAF integrates with other services. So for example, like integrating with CloudFront, there's a lot of benefits to that. There's benefits of like edge protection and stuff like that. But again, like you said, we don't really have enough time, so we're kind of going to go, into how CloudFront and WAF can be integrated. There are different configuration steps that you'd have to take. So like origin protection and, associating the processes and cache behavior settings. So like with CloudFront and WAF, there's a lot you can do, but there's other services as well that you would integrate with WAF. For example, the most common one I see is the ALB integration. So, using a load balancer with your WAF, how you would run that, especially when we're considering things like you said before, we have a performance consideration with our company, their cloud gaming. And so thinking of performance, you would need that load balancer to be able to ensure that you're not, ramping up on one server, and how does, WAF actually integrate into that and help, so using both the load balancer to be able to manage the application from a, like an uptime availability standpoint versus WAF, which is more of your, authentication perspective, how those, rules will propagate between the two services. And then, of course, because, I'm from IR, so I'm looking at monitoring and logging. So, CloudWatch provides a lot of metrics. And so, that's something we want to look into. I know that there are other integrations like like with fire hose and stuff like that. But like some of the key metrics that you would use, or not use, but I guess monitor, would be like your blocked requests, any rules that trigger, and within that, any false positives. You want to monitor those, not just the false positives, because you want to be able to tune your rule set, but also your blocked requests and your rule triggers. So, okay, we denied this traffic. Why did we deny this traffic? What happened in there that caused that? Was it something malicious? Was there an attempt, or was this a false positive? Or going back and looking and being able to look through specific time windows to be able to compare your requests and your network traffic. So those are the types of things that I think of when we start talking about integrating with other services and kind of that complexity area.
Yeah. And the piece I would also add to that is what we see with customers is them usually saying, oh, we need to increase this rate limit, or we need to shorten this time frame, or something along those lines. And part of that comes from all of these different components and not having, sometimes there's legitimate use cases, but sometimes they're the understanding of how the services work, right? So part of that is, hey, am I monitoring my rule effectiveness with something like CloudWatch? That's a key component of saying, okay, we need this rate increase based on the way the services that we need to do this particular item. Well, let me see your rules. How are they set up? Well, the rules don't have names on it or descriptions, and there's no documentation on rule purposes or the expected behaviors of these rules. And oftentimes it's a lot of the and/or kind of noodle soup, I would say, of everything kind of intertwining, and it just works, right? Because there's enough logic in there that it works. But sometimes you can really take that step back and understanding how your traffic is supposed to flow and how those allows and blocks and deny, all those things work within your organization, and then crafting the rules appropriately, right? Because when you have a large scale enterprise environment, what you're trying to avoid is that redundant and conflicting rule component of it, right? Or the ordering. That's another piece of it. So you can have conflicting rules and ordering. And because of that, you say, oh, I need more rules added, right? Can we do something like that? Well, let's understand what you're trying to achieve from all these different rule perspectives. So I think that's an important part of the puzzle. And the way that you go about this is, one, documentation, visualization. And I often say visualization because diagram, picture is 1,000 words, diagram is at least 5. Because when you start to look at network diagrams, just understanding the flow from end to end is very important. Because who else is going to use and understand your flow from end to end? Incident responders. Tell me how this works, right? From end to end. So we can see the gaps and kind of see where these outline pieces come from. But the other place that you can start is understanding what's out there. And the way to do that is going on a knowledge quest. We always say we like to, shift left, but we also say that we like to build aura. And the way that you build aura, especially when it comes to WAF, where everything's kind of access denied or allowed depending on your aura level, you want to go to a place of documentation, and the best place to do that is some of the AWS documentation. So when it comes to sorting that documentation to your needs, there's kind of levels that we like to consider around here at the Safe Room Feature and Security Side Quest. And one of those areas is L100. So we're going with our fighting game theme today. So you're the defense rookie. L100. Where do you start? Hey, let's start right over here where we're supposed to be. So if we go to WAF and kind of understanding it, I would say what new updates have been? Well, there's a new console experience for AWS WAF. And the visualization is important because we understand IAC, automation, we want to be there, but sometimes you just need to see the visualization of the console itself just to be like, all right, let me just go code this. All right, let me do this so I can reduce manual input and click ops and all that good stuff. But I would say go through, understand what it's supposed to look like in your training room, as we were calling our training arena. So this is a great blog that goes through that. I think it's a good starting point because then you can hop into, once your interest has been piqued, into, hey, what are the different services like WAF and Shield and Firewall Manager, so on and so forth, and how I can leverage them within my organization. Because if you take something like Firewall Manager, maybe you just want to manage your WAF, or maybe you want to just manage security groups or something along those lines. Can you do those? Well, find out through the reading of this documentation, because it's all important stuff to go through and kind of take everything piece by piece. Because something like allow all requests except the ones that you specify sounds interesting to dive into, because how do I know what request to specify? That's a question that we get. And the way to understand that is kind of digging into, all right, let me start with some of the recommendations of, hey, what are some of the managed rules? What are some of the baseline rules that I'm supposed to understand and know? And that's kind of where we start to go from the L100 to maybe the L200 piece of, okay, I understand this piece now. Now I'm a counter specialist. Well, if you are a counter specialist, you kind of leveled up. That means you can take in, from a defensive perspective, you take in the defense, you block it. But now you can counter. And how does that look within kind of understanding maybe some rate-based rules or configuring protections inside of WAF? From those standpoints, I think it's an important part, because you may not see the entire picture today. But when some topic comes up like, hey, how do I protect generative AI within my environment? This is the stuff that you think about tomorrow or currently, depending on your maturity level. So this is all parts of becoming that counter specialist is, okay, I am ready to protect my environment, my perimeter from the network or other perimeter, but, and other, I mean data. So when you start to think of, I always like to give the dramatic pause a little bit, but the counter specialist is the specialist when it comes to this, because once you pull off enough counters, eventually you see an achievement unlocked pop up on the screen, and then you become the Web Guardian legend. There's a lot of legends out there. You can be one too. And the way you do that is a lot of labs, one, if you like to go down the workshop route, or just going through and experimenting, going to some Gits, some deep dives into the architecture, things of that nature, because what you're trying to do is become the person who understands all these different pieces of the puzzle, and then comes back and shares it with us, either externally on other platforms or right there in the chat, because it's great to see that people are diving in and understanding and telling us of their stories. Because the one thing we usually tell you is, hey, every experience point helps you to level up yourself and your security posture. And there's one other thing, and that thing is usually said by Russ.
Create an incident response plan.
Yes. And 10 points, I would say 10 billion points to you if you do. But if you want to find out how we kind of progress this WAF story a little bit more, come back next week and we'll tell you how we can level up from the training ground to real life. So until next time, take care, have fun, and happy Monday.